Hello, my name is Eamon Kregen and my video for Heritage Week 2021 is about the history of Offaly Hurling. This video is funded by Creative Ireland and is brought to you by Offaly Libraries. Amid scenes of the most incredible, heart-rending, emotional, sheer, unadulterated joy, Offaly won their first Leinster Senior Hurling Championship title on July 13, 1980. It was far from an unlucky 13 for Offaly, who ended decades as a peripheral bystander as hurling made big guns mopped up the lion's share of honours. They had made occasional attempts at entry to the big time, days when they went toe-to-toe with the aristocrats of hurling. A 1969 Leinster Senior Hurling final defeat by Kilkenny remained particularly entrenched in folklore in the county. That had been the year when Offaly so nearly made a breakthrough. They had enjoyed arguably their greatest victory up to that point when they beat then All-Ireland champions Wexford in the Leinster semi-final. Ahead by an almost unimaginable 5-4 to 0-5 at half-time, Offaly withstood a ferocious Wexford second half rally to win by 5-10 to 3-11. They almost pulled it off in the Leinster final, taking the game to Kilkenny and outscoring them by 16 scores to 12. Unfortunately, the 3 goals Kilkenny got trumped all as they were mightily relieved to win by 3-9 to 16 points. It was a game looked back on with huge regret by that Offaly team for several years. It was also a rare venture out into the sunshine for Offaly as they were fretted back into mediocrity for the next decade. The 1970s and indeed before that will be outlined briefly in a while, but back to 1980 for a few moments. That was a day of the most piercing, nerve-wracking drama possible. The final scoreline of 3-17 to 5-10 in Offaly's win over Kilkenny suggests that it was something special, but really it only touches on the surface of what occurred that day. Even now, looking back on the YouTube videos of that game, it is impossible not to be affected by it, not to feel the hair tingle on the back of your neck as Offaly turned in a sensational second half display and the realisation dawned that a stunning victory was within reach. Kilkenny were unbackable hot favourites going into that game. They were the reigning All-Ireland champions and had won 4 All-Ireland and 7 Leinster senior hurling titles in the 1970s. Offaly had been literally nowhere. The only beacon of hope was a historic Leinster under-21 hurling title in 1978, and the importance of that to the eventual breakthrough was significant, even if it could not be understood at the time. There was, however, no tangible evidence to suggest that Offaly could win. In 1978, they had been absolutely destroyed by Kilkenny, 2-17 to 1-4 in the Leinster semi-final in Portlaoise. In 1979, they had been much better, winning Wexford close in a tie as they lost by a point, 0-17 to 2-10. They had beaten Laois and Dublin on the way to their 1980 Leinster final. The form was good and they had won both games well. 2-10 to 12 points against Laois, a county who had inflicted plenty of defeats on Offaly down the years, and 0-18 to 0-10 by Dublin. Yet no one outside the camp could have made a coherent case for what was about to happen. The change had begun from within. Andy Gallagher, a stalwart goalkeeper from the 1950s and 60s, was the manager, and the appointment of a Kilkenny man, Diarmuid Healy, as coach added a crucial extra ingredient to the mix as he helped the Tullamore man work on their skills and, most importantly, their self-belief. It all erupted on a Croke Park day of the most fiery intensity and drama. The extent to which Offaly were underdogs is reflected by the attendance, a paltry 9,613 people. In the years afterwards, you would think it was 50,000, judging by the number of people who claimed to be there. Before 1980, Offaly had never beaten Kilkenny in the championship. There had been some near misses, but the familiar story was a bad beating. From the start, they carried the game to Kilkenny. Johnny Flaherty's return from abroad in 1979 was another crucial piece of the jigsaw. An exciting young talent in 1969, he had made his debut in 1966, and his absence for most of the 1970s was one of the many reasons for their struggles in the decade. He didn't play at all from 1975 to 1978 as he spent time in Canada and the USA, and his early goal in the 1980 Leinster final got Offaly off to a flyer. They led by 7 points at one stage, but at half-time Kilkenny were in front 3-6 to 110, and it all had an air of normality. In previous years, Offaly would have folded, but this time they were reading from a different script. They got their noses in front early on in the second half, and didn't panic when Kilkenny struck back to take the lead. Flaherty's second goal, a familiar hand pass, put Offaly back in front, and they could not be stopped. A free from Corrigan put them 4 clear, and it needed that cushion. Because it wasn't over, as Matt Root got it back to a minimum with a goal. Incidentally, Root was to break Offaly's hearts in 1982 when his controversial late goal denied him a third Leinster title in a row, but he proved to be filling on this occasion as he missed the last gasp chance of an equalising point. It was hurling at its most raw and human, as both sides fought with everything they had, making mistakes and showing great quality and character. The scenes as Johnny Flaherty raced up the right sideline and then leapt into his subs with pure joy as the final whistle blew were never to be forgotten. They were incredible scenes as the players celebrated with supporters on the field, and as Pádraig Horn made his way to the Hogan stand to receive the Bob O'Keefe Cup. Horn had swapped his jersey for a Kilkenny one and suddenly realised that it would be better to receive the cup in an Offaly jersey, and he made a very emotive speech as he accepted the Bob O'Keefe Cup. Unfortunately, the day ended in tragedy for Pádraig as he received the news after arriving back in the dressing room that his father Tommy had died suddenly that afternoon. Before that, there were never to be forgotten scenes. One of the most memorable was the celebrations of midfield star Joachim Kelly as he arrived onto the steps, bloodied but grinning like a Cheshire cat, having been replaced early in the second half after a clash that almost knocked him senseless. It was a long time since Croke Park had witnessed scenes like this, and they were to become a regular feature of life for Offaly Hurling in the next 20 years. At the time, people could have been forgiven for thinking that the result was a once-off, a freak of nature, and that a lethargic, complacent Kilkenny had been caught on the hop by a side who would soon disappear off the map, as other counties had done in the past and have done since. Not Offaly. Instead, it was the forerunner of a run of the most incredible, sustained success. By the time the Great Decline began after the 2000 All-Ireland Hurling final defeat, Offaly had annexed 4 All-Ireland Senior Hurling Championships, 7 Leinster Senior Hurling titles, 1 National Hurling League, 3 All-Ireland Minor Hurling, 4 Leinster Minor Hurling, and 5 Leinster Under-21 Hurling titles. Only the 1978 Under-21 came outside that remarkable time span. Offaly were beaten 4-9 to 3-10 in the All-Ireland semi-final by Galway, with a powerful late rally putting them right on the eventual champions' tail. As Galway defender, the late GA president Joe McDonagh sang the Rests awake after they had defeated Limerick in the All-Ireland final. Not many realised that Offaly centre-back Pat Delaney would be introducing the Offaly Rover into wider public consciousness after their famous win in the All-Ireland final just 12 months later. How did it happen? How did a county who had never won a Leinster Senior Hurling title win their first and embark on a run of such sustained success? How did it develop 2 great, distinct, phenomenally successful sides, one in the 1980s, the other in the 1990s, and with only a couple of players bridging the teams? Like most things that happen, you have to go back first to understand how things developed and emerged. I have been researching a detailed history book of Offaly GA for the past year plus. It is a serious project that will probably take another 2 years at least to complete, but it is worth taking that time to do it properly. My memories of that 1980 Leinster Senior Hurling final are of my father Noel and my late mother Anne getting wildly excited listening to the radio commentary as we travelled from one grandmother in Killinarahan to another in Belmont. As the commentator got more animated by the second, my father had to stop the car somewhere at the far side of Ballycumber, as the excitement mounted, and at one stage he had to get out of it. I was 7 years of age at the time, and it is one of my brightest, earliest and most profound memories. The happiness they experienced on that day was matched by thousands of their fellow county men and women, and it also showed what the GAA means to Offaly. Offaly is a comparatively small but well spread out and diverse county. It is an inland county, and its main distinguishing features are the Slieve Bloom Mountains and the River Shannon. Before the GAA was formed, there was little to unite the county. People on the Tipperary border near Roscrea had nothing in common with those living on the Kildare border in Edenderry. The GAA was the one thing that has united the county, all parts of it. It gave the county its sense of identity, and it provided it with its badge of honour. It distinguished it from its neighbours, and people from Offaly were able to stick their chest out anywhere thanks to the remarkable GAA run that really took off from 1960. The history of Offaly GAA is so fascinating, way more so than I ever realised before I took on my research project. The purpose of this talk is to outline the Offaly Hurling story. Its focus is the successful years from 1980 to 2000, years that began with Kilkenny and ended with an All-Ireland final mauling by their great rivals in 2000. To put it into its proper context, I will outline the Offaly hurling story in a few different strands. The development of hurling in Offaly from the formation of the GAA in 1884 up to the 1960s, the importance of the years from the 1969 Leinster final defeat up to 1980, and then the great one from 1980 to 2000. I will also briefly touch on the great decline since then and where Offaly hurling is now. The Offaly hurling story is a somewhat strange one. It was football that first brought Offaly to national prominence. They won their first Leinster senior football title in 1960, lost a famous All-Ireland Senior football final to Down in 1961 in front of a record attendance at Croke Park. They won their first All-Ireland Senior title in 1971 and retained it in 1972 with the team backboned by members of the 1964 All-Ireland Minor Football Champions. Offaly went on to win one of the most famous All-Ireland football titles of all time, with Seamus Darby's late goal denying 5 in a row seeking Kerry in 1982. The Offaly Football Roll of Honour reads: 3 All-Ireland Senior Football titles, 10 Leinster Senior Football, 1 National Football League, 1 All-Ireland Minor Football, 1 All-Ireland Under-21 Football, 7 Leinster Under-21 Football, and 6 Leinster Minor Football. The hurling breakthrough didn't come until 20 years after that historic football success in 1960, but the two can be linked. Offaly is a dual county. Many of its clubs play both codes, and they have had several players who have played both at the highest level, along with thousands in club fare. Eamon Kregen is one of an elite group who has All-Ireland Senior Hurling and Football medals, winning hurling in 1981 and football a year later. The footballers also helped inspire the hurlers by their achievements. Yet they also have very distinct, unique characteristics. The hurling stronghold is in the south of the county. The football, the heartland, is from mid to north Offaly and in the east of the county. The traditionally accepted rule of thumb is that the south of the county in hurling terms comes within a line across the county through the blue ball, while there is a powerful football pocket west of Clara, incorporating huge areas such as Boher Parish, Forban, Shannonbridge and Cloughan. The games developed in this manner because of centuries-held tradition. While there were different versions of football played down the centuries, and they were an important part of the lives of many Irish people, they bore little resemblance to the game that we now love and cherish. Hurling is the more ancient game. It is entrenched in Irish folklore and mythology. There is loads of evidence that hurling, or versions of it, were played in Offaly long before the GAA was established in 1884. In 1981, a hurley that was at least 200 years old was found in a bog near Ballydermot, Edenderry. Hurling was often associated with faction fights and general mayhem, with plenty of evidence relating to incidents, in the 1800s. In 1836, a man had his skull broken with a hurl during a game in Kinnity, and the culprit was jailed. Banagher was the venue for faction fights and violence during hurling games in the famine years. On one occasion, a man was violently assaulted by assailants who were armed with pitchforks and hurleys. On St. Patrick's Day in 1836, hurlers attacked the home of a Protestant after a game in Oakley Park near Corrigan. Such incidents gave hurling a bad name, particularly among the gentry and landed class. But landlords also organised and permitted games of hurling for their tenants and neighbours during their sports days, which were a regular feature of life on some estates. An estimated 10,000 people attended a famous hurling contest in Banagher in 1773. Of course, it is impossible to verify the accuracy of that attendance, but there is no doubt that hurling was a very popular, important feature of life in rural Ireland, providing fun and games for a people who face many challenges in life. There is a rich heritage of hurling matches in the Foralaka and Glenregan areas of Kinnity for several decades prior to the formation of the GAA. These appear to have been huge occasions for the local community, with matches played most Sundays and teams of 21 aside competing for the usual prize of a barrel of porter, watched by hundreds of spectators and followed by a ceilidh in the winning townsland where the losing team also attended. A desire to rekindle interest in the dying game of hurling, particularly from controversial founding secretary Michael Cusick, was one of the main reasons the GAA was formed in November 1884 in Thurles. It was also a battle for control of Irish athletics, but that is not a story for this talk, intriguing as it may be. The biggest irony about the Offaly GAA story is that hurling was the strongest code in the early days of the association. While Clara was the first club formed, coming into existence in 1884, the south of the county got organised much quicker than the north and other part of the then King's County. Surprisingly, some clubs in the south played football before hurling took primacy. The first official game under the rules of the new association was an 1885 football one between Kildare and Killeen. This seems to have been a fairly hybrid affair with references to touchdowns, and there were definite similarities with rugby. The early years of the GAA in Offaly were very shaky, very fragmented. The early days were mainly confined to tournaments, and an Offaly GAA County Board was only formed in 1887. At that stage, there were 2 clubs in Boer, along with ones in Cloughan, Shinrone, Kildare, Kinnity, Cadamstown, Banagher and Frankfurt, which is now of course Kilcormac. The only club north of the Blue Ball was Rahon. The first senior championships in Offaly took place in 1888, and it is significant that there were just 2 clubs in football, a straight final where Banagher defeated Rahon. By contrast, 12 clubs went to the post in hurling, and the championship was won by Thomas Davis of Moneygall, Duncairn and Barna. The later departure of Moneygall to Tipperary in 1910 remains a source of angst for Offaly GAA supporters. Considering its strength now, it is remarkable to note that the GAA almost went under in its early years. It was riveted by attempted and successful takeovers by the IRB and then by the fallout from the Parnell split. Offaly was not immune from those, and it appears that they did not affiliate to Central Council for a few years into the 1890s. There was a powerful clerical influence on the GAA in Offaly in the early years, and they took an anti-Parnell stance after his political downfall, while the IRB-controlled Central Council backed him. The Offaly GAA County Board was officially formed in 1894, and the first official club championships took place in 1896. The decision to expunge everything prior to that from the record is very questionable, as there were championships, and those wins did mean a lot to the victors. Those years were important for the development of the GAA in Offaly, and there is no doubt that the county was affiliated in some of the years in the 1880s, but that is a debate for another forum. It was also in the 1890s before Offaly saw action in inter-county fair. They had been entered into the Leinster Hurling and Football Championships in 1888 and 1889, but they did not participate. Offaly did have 4 players on a famous and contentious invasion tour to the USA in 1888, and their first appearance in inter-county action came in 1896. At that stage, the club's senior champions represented the county in inter-county championships, with Gallagher competing in hurling and Tullamore in football. As the years wore on, this changed. Firstly with the county champions inviting in players from other clubs to help bolster their chances, and then with the selection of full, true county teams. Offaly competed much better in hurling than football for a few decades. It is telling that Offaly almost always competed in the Leinster Senior Hurling Championship, while the footballers competed in junior ranks only for several years in the 20th century. Offaly were beaten in Leinster Senior Hurling finals in 1901, 1924, 1926 and 1928, while the footballers were beaten in the 1907 Leinster final before their next appearance in 1945. The hurlers were particularly close in the 1920s, and they could have won one in that decade. They were reasonably competitive in their 3 finals, but the loss of key players to emigration was a factor in them not getting across the line. Emigration was a huge feature of life in those challenging early years following independence, and thousands of Offaly's youth took the boat to the USA, Australia and England. In New York, Offaly teams there enjoyed phenomenal success. They won the New York Senior Hurling Championship in 1920, 1925, 26, 27, 28, 1930, 31, 35, 36, 39, 43 and 1945 before the Great Run came to an end. Many other star players had played for Offaly before emigration, and their loss kept Offaly in the pack back at home. After the 1928 Leinster final defeat by Dublin, Offaly entered a long valley period, and it was 1969 before they returned to the Leinster final. They had won the All-Ireland Junior Hurling Championship in 1923, played in 1924 as the Civil War fallout impacted on the GAA, and they won it again in 1929. Those successes remained imprinted on Offaly minds for a long time, especially as they were followed by some incredibly bleak decades. With the seniors receiving some horrific beatings, the minors did threaten to break through, losing finals in 1948, 1950 and 1957. Why did things go so bad after a promising enough beginning? There were a myriad of factors, and the Offaly club hurling scene was probably not conducive to united county teams. It was notoriously tough, with the rivalry between Drumcullen and Coolderry particularly famed, though it was a far from exclusive club. There were a lot of incidents, matches abandoned, players and clubs suspended, hurlers hurt. It did keep Offaly back at county level. Sometimes it spilled over into county teams. In 1967, there was an especially famous senior championship match against Westmeath. Dubbed the Battle of Boer, Offaly suffered a devastating and self-inflicted 5-10 to 4-8 defeat on a dark day when hurling took a back seat, strokes were pulled with abandon, a handful of players were sent off, and there was a masked ball near the end. Yet, 2 years later, Offaly were within touching distance of a first Leinster senior title, and their stars were changing. There were a number of big factors in this. The emergence of Board and Mona and ESB as massive employers in Offaly from the 1940s on was crucial, and its importance to the emergence cannot be understated. Their impact was felt in football firstly, as many of their big stations and works were in football areas, but hurlers and their families also received plenty of employment. They gave Offaly near full employment, they kept young people at home as foreign lands lost their lustre, and equally as importantly, it brought emigrants back home from abroad. The club scene also changed. The 1961 formation of St. Rynagh's was vital. Prior to that, several clubs had come and went in the wider Banagher and Cloughan area, but St. Rynagh's turned Offaly hurling on its head after they were formed in 1961. They embarked on a run of mind-boggling success, winning 18 senior hurling championship titles, with 13 of those coming in the 1960s, 70s and 80s. They ended the dominance of Kildare and Drumcullen, while Kennedy also re-emerged in 1967, feeding very skillful hurlers onto the Offaly panel. Schools were another factor, as Presentation College in Boer began to beat the famed Kilkenny nursery St Kieran's in the Leinster Colleges Championships with regularity. Presentation College won the All-Ireland Senior B Colleges title in 1969 and they won their first A title in 1977 when they beat Kilkenny CBS in the juvenile final. They finally won their first Senior A title in 1979, again beating Kilkenny CBS, and those victories over Kilkenny and Wexford schools were huge in that Offaly players now knew they could beat players from those counties. The success was carried on when St Brendan's Community School was formed as an amalgamation of Presentation College, Boer Vocation Schools and St John's Mercy Convent. St Brendan's retained the Leinster title in 1980, won two more in 1985 and 1986, and in 1986 they went the whole way and won the All-Ireland. Many players from those sides in the 1970s and 1980s went on to become household names, while Trojan work was also done in the Banagher schools. Ironically, the 1970s successes for Boer schools came during a trying decade for Offaly, and there were some dark, troubled days. In 1975, only 14 players were present at the official throw-in time for a National Hurling League game against Antrim in Boer. That team included future heroes in Damien Martin, Pádraig Horan, Joachim Kelly, Pat Fleury, Pat Delaney and Pat Carroll, but unsurprisingly they fell to a dispiriting defeat. They could only draw with Kildare in the 1975 Leinster Championship, though they won the replay comfortably. Offaly lost to Westmeath in the 1976 Championship and participated in a particularly notorious league game that winter when they beat Wicklow by the scoreline of 0-3 to 0-1. Some of those results were an aberration as a generation of outstanding hurlers emerged, many from the successful Boer school teams, who picked players from all across the Offaly hurling heartland. They beat Wexford in the 1977 league quarter-final, losing to Clare in the semi-final. The 1978 Leinster Under-21 hurling title was huge. They beat Laois by 2-14 to 2-7 in that, while they recorded historic wins over Kilkenny in the 1978 and 1979 National Hurling League. It all combined and erupted with great fury in that never-to-be-forgotten 1980 Leinster final. A year later, Offaly had shown that it was no fluke. They retained the Leinster title, beating Wexford in the final. They had almost bit the dust in the Leinster semi-final against Laois when they won a high-scoring shootout by 320 to 610, a game that resulted in the then veteran Damien Martin being recalled to the goals. Martin made a crucial save from no lane in the All-Ireland final against Galway, and this kept him in it as Offaly staged a terrific rally. Pat Delaney's storming run, Brendan Birmingham's hand pass and Flaherty's goal gave Offaly near the lead near the end, and Pádraig Horan and Danny Owens added points as Offaly won by 2-12 to 0-15. After losing to Kilkenny in 1982 and 1983, they returned to the All-Ireland final in centenary year in 1984. Played in hurlers to mark the formation of the GAA there, Offaly were favourites but were ambushed by Cork, who won easily, 3-16 to 1-12. That defeat galvanised them for the following year when they won their second All-Ireland title, beating Galway again in the final. The 1980s was a fantastic decade for Offaly. They competed in every single Leinster final and won 6, including 3 in a row from 1988 to 1990. Unfortunately, they couldn't reach any All-Ireland final in those years, with their 1989 semi-final defeat by Antrim a particularly traumatic occasion. However, by now the second great Offaly hurling team had begun to arrive on the scene. Offaly won 3 All-Ireland minor hurling titles in 1986, 1987 and 1989, and there was an air of excitement about the future. Those teams had come through the school system. They had been inspired by the 1980-1985 senior side, and they had some of the most talented players to ever play the game. They also went on to fulfil their potential. As the 1980s team began to decline and the talented young minors began to arrive on the scene, it was not a simple time. Some legendary hurlers had to be pushed, some young players were thrown in too soon, and managers were changed with rapid and sometimes indecent haste for a few years. The 1991 National Hurling League triumph, beating Wexford in the final, bridged the two teams. Jim Troy, Joachim Kelly, Joe Dooley, Mark Corrigan and team captain Danny Owens were still there from the 1980s. Troy was in goals when Offaly won All-Ireland again in 1994, while Dooley won in 1994 and 1998 when he won his only All-Star. Several of the minor teams had been thrown in. Brian Whelan, Offaly's most decorated hurler and the only modern player picked on the 2000 Team of the Millennium, was on the half-back line, while the team included another of Offaly's greatest hurlers, Johnny Dooley, along with a few more from the minor supply line. A crucial piece of the jigsaw was the appointment of Limerick legend Eamon Kregen as manager in late 1992. A tough disciplinarian who was not afraid to face down players, he oversaw an unlucky defeat by Kilkenny in 1993 before the Leinster title was regained in 1994. Offaly went on to beat his native county in one of hurling's most famous All-Ireland finals, with a stunning late rally yielding 2-5 and a sensational 3-16 to 2-13 win in '94. Amazingly, Offaly's last Leinster title came in 1995 when they went to the All-Ireland final. They were beaten by Clare in a game that is still looked on with huge regret. Offaly were favourites, and it was definitely one that got away, but things balanced out in 1998. After failing to get out of Leinster in 1996 and 1997, hurling changed in 1998 with the introduction of a backdoor system for beaten provincial finalists, something that later expanded into a second chance saloon for all teams. Offaly took full advantage. They were well beaten by Kilkenny in the Leinster final, but recovered to reach the All-Ireland semi-final where they faced a then fearsome Clare side. Tipperary folk hero Michael "Babs" Keating had been shown the door after the Leinster final defeat when he had compared the players to sheep in a heap. An unknown Galway man, Michael Bond, came in and he galvanised the team who had a big point to prove. Offaly finally clicked to life in the first All-Ireland semi-final against Clare, a 1-13 each draw. They didn't recapture that form in the replay and were trailing by 3 points near the end when referee Jimmy Cooney inadvertently blew up time early. Furious fans staged a sit-down protest on the pitch. A refixture was ordered the following day, and on a never-to-be-forgotten day in hurlers, Offaly were outstanding in a 0-16 to 0-13 win. The sight of thousands of supporters flooding out of pubs, restaurants and cafes as the Offaly team entered the Thurles Square was one of the most emotional GAA experiences for many. The All-Ireland final was almost an anticlimax in comparison, as Offaly again rallied superbly in the second half. With Brian Whelan, flu-stricken before the game, superb in a new role at full forward, Offaly were full value for their 2-16 to 1-13 win. There was one more high point for Offaly hurling. Unluckily beaten by Cork in the 1999 All-Ireland semi-final, they defeated the Munster men by 0-19 to 0-15 in an epic semi-final in 2000. It was also the dying kick of a great team. They made a disastrous start against Kilkenny in the All-Ireland final and were overrun in a heavy defeat. The decline set in quickly after this. There were occasional good days, encouraging results, but the gap between Offaly and hurling's elite was widening with every year. A shocking 6-28 to 15 points championship destruction by Kilkenny in 2005 confirmed what most people in Offaly suspected. Offaly was no longer a top-tier county. It gathered pace after this, again with only occasional positive days. Their last appearance in the Leinster final was 2004 when they missed a decent opportunity against Wexford, but just couldn't get the result. In 2019, Offaly were back in hurling's second tier, the Joe McDonagh Cup, and relegation from that to the Christy Ring Cup was a savage blow to a very proud county. Failure to win the third tier, the Christy Ring Cup, in the COVID-19 hit 2020 was as big a blow as any to Offaly Hurling, but now there are signs of something happening once again. Offaly have won promotion back to Division 1 of the National Hurling League. They have competed in the Leinster Minor Hurling Final, and a new generation of talented hurler is emerging. The talk is more positive, the signs more encouraging than they have been in several years. It is early days, but big steps forward are being taken, and the new players look to have the right attitude. Offaly are still a long way from the top level and winning the Lee McCarthy Cup, but history has shown that things can change in a very short time. After all, don't forget that from 1975 to 1978, Offaly were drawing with Kildare, beating Wicklow while scoring just 3 points, and being destroyed by Kilkenny. Yet, they were All-Ireland champions by 1981. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my Offaly hurling history. It is just a brief synopsis of what is an incredible, amazing story. A lot more on this will be revealed in my Offaly GA history, which will hopefully be released in the next couple of years. Thanks again to Creative Ireland, who have funded this video, and once again it is brought to you by Offaly Libraries. Thank you.